After my wife passed, I raised twin toddlers alone. My parents turned their backs, but my in-laws embraced us. Years later, I sold my horse ranch for $00 million. When my parents arrived, I unveiled the surprise meant for my in-laws, watching their smiles vanish instantly. Imagine being utterly broken, kneeling at your beloved wife's grave, your two tiny children clinging to your legs, only to realize that the people who shared your blood had absolutely no intention of helping. The betrayal was a cold, brutal shock. But what if that heartbreaking abandonment was just the prelude to an even more astonishing journey, one of unexpected kindness, unwavering support, and a triumph no one saw coming? That day, the air in our small Kentucky town hung heavy, not just with grief, but with a cold, shocking truth. The scent of damp earth from Sarah's fresh grave mingled with the bitter reality of abandonment. I cradled Owen and Ava, their tiny hands clutching my shirt, and knew I was utterly alone, or so I thought. My name is Ethan Miller, and I'm 33 years old. I live in a quiet rural corner of Kentucky, where endless green fields stretch out, and the morning air is often filled with the distant whinny of horses. I'm not some extraordinary person. I'm just a farmer, working at a horse ranch owned by a kind old man named Walter. My life revolved around caring for purebred horses, a job I poured my heart into. Life with my gentle wife, Sarah, and our adorable twins, Owen and Ava, was simple, yet brimming with joy and laughter. Our little home, though not wealthy, was always warm, always full of light. But then, like a sudden, brutal storm sweeping across those familiar fields, my world imploded. Sarah, my light, my anchor, left this world. The pain was indescribable, a gaping wound that never seemed to close, and our children, only 5 years old, were too young to truly comprehend the magnitude of their loss. I can still vividly recall that fateful day in the hospital. The doctor's voice was low, heavy, as he called me into the room. Sarah lay there, frail and fading, but her eyes, those beautiful eyes, were still bright, still full of love. She held my hand, whispering how much she loved me, loved Owen, loved Ava, and that I had to be strong for our children. I nodded, tears blurring my vision, but inside, something profoundly shattered. That cruel cancer stole her from me mere months after the diagnosis, so fast I didn't even have time to brace myself. Sarah passed away on a drizzly afternoon, leaving me standing silently by the hospital window, staring out at a gray sky that perfectly mirrored my broken heart. Sarah's funeral was simple, just as she was. I chose a small church on the outskirts of town, the same one where we had once held hands, promising forever. Owen and Ava, just 5, clung tightly to my hands, their innocent eyes not yet fully grasping the raw pain of our reality. They wore the green woolen outfit Sarah had knitted herself, asking me in their small, trembling voices, "Where's Mommy, Daddy? Will she come back?" All I could do was hold them closer, desperately trying to hide the tears that threatened to overwhelm me. In that quiet church, I felt the presence of loved ones, but also a cold distance that etched itself into my memory. My in-laws, Arthur and Eleanor Davies, arrived early that morning. They stood by my side, their shoulders trembling with grief that mirrored my own. Eleanor hugged Owen and Ava tightly, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Arthur, a man of few words, placed a strong, steady hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently as if to silently offer his strength. They didn't need to say much. Their eyes held a boundless love for Sarah, for me, and for their 2 small grandchildren. That genuine sincerity was a small, fleeting warmth in the freezing grip of my despair. But then, my own parents, George and Susan Miller, arrived, and a chill seeped into my bones. They showed up as if merely fulfilling an obligation, standing stiffly in a corner. My mother, Susan, wore an expensive black dress, her lips pursed tightly, never once meeting my gaze. My father, George, stood with his arms crossed, his gaze passing over me as if I were a complete stranger. They didn't hug me, didn't offer a word of comfort to Owen or Ava. They exchanged a few perfunctory words with other mourners before quickly leaving. I stood there, watching their retreating figures, feeling as though my heart was being crushed. I knew they had never truly accepted Sarah, never saw her as their daughter-in-law. To them, she was merely that poor farmer's daughter, a disgrace to the prestigious Miller family, a family I supposedly threw away my future for. The days after the funeral felt like a bottomless abyss. Every morning, I woke to the empty space beside me on the bed where Sarah used to lie, and the pain surged anew. I tried to stay composed for Owen and Ava, but raising 2 children alone left me utterly exhausted. I had to be up by 4 a.m., prepare breakfast, take them to school, then rush to the horse ranch. The horses, once my passion, now felt like an overwhelming burden as I juggled work with the relentless demands of caring for my children. Some nights, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills, wondering how in the world I could keep going. Owen and Ava, though so young, seemed to sense my exhaustion. They would cuddle into my arms, hugging me tightly as if afraid I, too, would disappear like their mother. One evening, Ava looked up at me with her big, round eyes and asked, "Daddy, is Mommy mad because I wasn't good? Is that why she left us?" I hugged her fiercely, holding back a fresh wave of tears, telling her that their mother loved them more than anything, that she was just in a faraway place, watching over and protecting them. But deep down, a terrifying question gnawed at me. How could I ever replace Sarah as a pillar of strength for these 2 children? The pressure grew heavier. I started losing sleep, my mind weary, my body drained. Some days, I stood in the horse stable, holding the reins, my vision blurring from sheer exhaustion. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Couldn't bear it all alone. In my desperation, I thought of turning to the only family I had left to rely on. My parents, George and Susan Miller. I had never wanted to ask for help. My pride was something I held dear. But for Owen and Ava, I was willing to set aside every ounce of ego. One afternoon, I drove to my parents' elegant house on the outskirts of Louisville. That house, with its white picket fence and meticulously trimmed garden, always felt foreign to me, even though it was where I grew up. When I knocked, my mother, Susan, opened the door, her eyes flickering with surprise, but absolutely no warmth. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold and distant. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I need help. I'm raising Owen and Ava alone. I'm exhausted. I was just hoping you and Dad could help a little. Maybe watch the kids or anything." Susan looked at me, her expression utterly unmoved. "Ethan, you know we're busy. We're taking care of Daniel's kids. Your brother needs us more right now. Besides, you chose your path, didn't you? When you married that girl, she trailed off, but I understood. That girl was Sarah, the one they never accepted." I stood there, feeling as though a knife had pierced my heart. I turned to my father, hoping he would say something, anything, but he only shook his head, his voice low and dismissive. "Ethan, you're a man. You need to handle this yourself. Don't bother us." I don't remember how I left that house. My mind echoed with their cold words, mixed with old memories. From the moment I first brought Sarah home to meet them, my parents had outright rejected her. They said she wasn't good enough, that a poor farmer's daughter like Sarah would drag me down and tarnish the Miller family name. They always boasted about Daniel, my younger brother, who went to a prestigious school and worked in the big city, though I knew he was never as successful as they claimed. To them, I was the failed son, the one who threw away a bright future to marry a girl who wasn't their equal. On the drive back, I pulled over in a grassy field, turned off the engine, and sat silently in the car. Tears fell, not from weakness, but from the crushing weight of feeling utterly alone. Sarah had been the only one who truly understood me, always holding my hand and saying we'd get through everything together. Now she was gone, and I was left with Owen and Ava, 2 little angels I had to protect at all costs. But how? When even my own family had turned their backs on me. I returned home and held Owen and Ava tightly. They slept soundly, unaware that their father was battling an ocean of pain and despair. In the darkness, I whispered to Sarah, as if she were still there, "What do I do, my love? How can I be strong enough to keep our children safe?" There was no answer. Only the sound of the wind whistling through the window, reminding me that the road ahead would be long and arduous. I didn't know that in those darkest days, a small glimmer of light was waiting for me, not from my own family, but from those I never expected would become my strongest support. After that devastating day, I left my parents' house with a heart heavier than stone. I felt like a lost soul in a barren field, with nowhere to find footing. Owen and Ava were the only reason I didn't completely collapse, but I knew I couldn't go on alone. I needed someone, anyone, to help me stand up and move forward. And then I thought of Arthur and Eleanor Davies, Sarah's parents. I hesitated for a long time before calling them. Arthur and Eleanor lived in a small house deep in rural Kentucky, where winding red dirt roads cut through fields of wheat and corn. Sarah had once told me that her parents weren't wealthy, but they had big hearts, always ready to share what little they had. I feared becoming a burden. But the image of Owen and Ava with their innocent eyes looking up at me every night left me no other choice. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling, and dialed their number. "Ethan?" Eleanor's voice came through, warm but tinged with concern. "Is something wrong, dear?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I don't know how to say this, but I'm really struggling. I can't take care of Owen and Ava alone. I need help." There was a pause on the other end. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice choked with emotion. "Ethan, you don't need to say anything more. Just bring the kids here. Our home is your home." Her words were like a warm breeze, finally easing the icy grip around my heart. I packed a few clothes for myself and the kids, loaded them into the old pickup truck, and drove straight to Arthur and Eleanor's house. The drive took over an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. I was anxious, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was taking advantage of their kindness. But when I pulled up to the small wooden house with its porch covered in climbing vines, Eleanor was already there. Her arms opened wide, her eyes shining with genuine sincerity. "Come in, Ethan," she said, hugging me tightly as if I were her own son. Arthur stood behind her, his silver hair falling over his forehead, offering a gentle smile. He stepped forward, patted my shoulder, and then bent down to hug Owen and Ava, who nestled into his arms as if they'd done it 1,000 times before. Arthur and Eleanor's house wasn't grand, just a 2-bedroom wooden home with creaky floors and the faint, comforting smell of freshly baked bread wafting from the kitchen. But from the moment I stepped inside, I felt a warmth I'd lost since Sarah's passing. Eleanor immediately went to the kitchen, preparing a simple but hearty dinner: mashed potatoes, stewed beans, and a plate of golden fried chicken. Owen and Ava, who had been withdrawn after those mournful days, began to chatter with Eleanor as she shared stories about Sarah's childhood, about how she used to run through the fields chasing rabbits. "Sarah was a lot like little Ava here," Eleanor said, ruffling Ava's hair, her eyes sparkling. "Just look at the way she smiles. It's just like her mother's." I sat there watching the scene and felt my heart soften. But at the same time, the pain resurfaced as I realized the stark contrast between my in-laws and my own parents. George and Susan had never hugged Owen or Ava like that, never sat down to tell them stories or simply ask how they were. They always kept their distance, as if the kids were proof of my mistake in marrying Sarah. But here, in this small house, Arthur and Eleanor treated me not just as a son-in-law, but as a true son. In the days that followed, I officially moved in with my in-laws. They absolutely refused to let me pay rent or cover any expenses, despite my insistence. "Ethan, you're family. No matter what happens, you belong here," Arthur said, his voice firm. "Family doesn't keep score." Eleanor took on caring for Owen and Ava like a true mother. Every morning, she woke up early to prepare breakfast, usually toast with homemade strawberry jam, and braided Ava's hair while teaching Owen how to tie his shoelaces. Arthur, despite his age, patiently drove the kids to school in his old pickup truck. One day, I saw him sitting under an oak tree in the yard, teaching Owen how to carve a small wooden boat, while Ava eagerly colored it with crayons. Watching that scene, I couldn't hold back my tears. This was what Sarah had always wanted for our children, to grow up surrounded by love, in simple but meaningful moments. I continued working at Walter's horse ranch. The work was still grueling, but coming home each evening, I no longer felt alone. Those stories, the laughter, the shared meals, not only helped me forget my exhaustion, but also gave me a renewed sense of strength, the strength of a true family. But I didn't always feel at ease. Some nights, when Owen and Ava were fast asleep, I sat alone on the porch, staring out at the dark fields. The pain of losing Sarah lingered like a wound that never healed. And then memories of my parents' coldness would resurface, leaving a bitter taste. I recalled the last time I begged for their help, the indifference in Susan's eyes, the detached tone, and George's dismissive voice. The stark contrast between Arthur and Eleanor's boundless love and my parents' chilling distance made me both immensely grateful and utterly heartbroken. One evening, as I sat on the porch, Eleanor came out carrying an old blanket and draped it over my shoulders. "It's chilly out here, Ethan," she said, then sat down beside me. I didn't say anything, just lowered my head. "What's on your mind, dear? If you can share it with me," she asked gently. I sighed, my voice heavy. "I don't understand why my own parents treat me like this. I've tried to do everything right, but to them, I'm never good enough. And you too. You treat me like your own son, even though I'm just your son-in-law. I don't know how to repay you." Eleanor placed her hand on mine, her eyes gentle but resolute. "Ethan, you don't owe us anything. You're Sarah's husband, the father of Owen and Ava. To us, you're already part of this family, and family doesn't need repayment. Just love is enough." Her words were like a flame, warming the deepest recesses of my heart. I looked at her, then out at the fields where the moonlight cast silver rays across the ground. In that moment, I made a silent vow to myself, to Sarah, and to Arthur and Eleanor. One day, when I was strong enough, I would repay them. I would care for them, honor them as they had opened their arms to save me and my children in our darkest days. I would do everything to ensure Owen and Ava grew up in a complete family, even without their mother by their side. The Davies family, despite their simple life, was always overflowing with love. Their modest wooden house, with its humble meals and evenings spent gathered around the fireplace, was a world apart from the cold indifference of the Miller household. I recalled the extravagant parties my biological parents used to throw, where they bragged about Daniel and his achievements, which I knew were often exaggerated. To them, pride and appearances were everything. But here, in this home, I learned that true value lies in genuine connection and sharing. Those months, though incredibly difficult, taught me many profound lessons. I began to learn how to manage my finances meticulously, tracking every cent of my meager wages to ensure it was enough for my children and to contribute to the household expenses. I was grateful for every meal Eleanor prepared, every trip Arthur made to drive the kids to school. And most importantly, I cultivated a fierce determination. I had to build a better life, not only for Owen and Ava, but also for Arthur and Eleanor, who had given me a home when I thought I had lost everything. I knew the road ahead would be long. But with the love of the Davies family, I began to believe I could do it. I would not let Sarah down, nor would I let those who loved me suffer. That was a promise I etched deeply into my heart, and I was determined to make it a reality. I knew I needed a breakthrough, an opportunity to change not just my life, but also the lives of Owen, Ava, and those who had taken me in. And that opportunity, I never imagined it would come so quickly, in a way I could never have anticipated. One early autumn morning, as cool breezes began to sweep through the Kentucky fields, Walter called me into his small office at the corner of the ranch. He was a weathered man, his face etched with wrinkles from years under the sun, but his eyes always radiated sincerity. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, "there's a horse fair in Lexington this weekend. I want you to come with me. You're the best we've got when it comes to caring for horses. I need you there to showcase some of our young horses." I was surprised. Walter rarely took me off the ranch. My work usually revolved around the stables, not major events like the Lexington Horse Fair where wealthy people, horse traders, and investors gathered. I nodded, though my heart was filled with a quiet unease. I wasn't used to crowds, polished suits, or smooth-talking conversations, but I knew this was a chance to learn, and I didn't want to let Walter down. When the day of the fair arrived, I wore the cleanest shirt Eleanor had carefully ironed for me, put on an old straw hat, and followed Walter to Lexington. The fair was buzzing with energy, the sound of horses whinnying mixed with laughter and chatter, the smell of hay mingling with the aroma of food from the stalls. Purebred horses were paraded, their coats gleaming in the sunlight, and the crowd applauded each time one galloped by. I stood by Walter, helping him introduce a few of our young horses, answering questions from clients about their care and training. I did it naturally because for me, horses weren't just work, they were my passion. While checking the hooves of a young horse, I heard a deep, warm voice behind me. You handle those horses with great care. Not many people pay attention to the details like that. I turned around to see an older man with silver hair, dressed in a simple but elegant suit. He introduced himself as Richard Stone, a retired investor who still had a passion for the horse racing industry. I was a bit flustered, unaccustomed to being noticed, but Mr. Stone smiled, his sharp yet friendly eyes putting me at ease. We started talking, and I quickly realized he wasn't like the others at the fair. He didn't boast or try to assert his authority. Instead, he asked about how I cared for the horses, the challenges I faced, and even about my life. I hadn't intended to share much, but something about him made me open up. I told him about Sarah, the crushing pain of losing her, about Owen and Ava, and how I was doing my best to hold our little family together. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. When I finished, he looked at me, his gaze seeming to see right through to my soul. "You've got grit, Ethan," he said. "And you've got talent. I've been in this industry long enough to recognize someone with potential. Have you ever thought about starting your own horse ranch?" His question stunned me. Start my own horse ranch? It was a dream I'd never dared to entertain. I was just a farmer scraping by on a modest wage. I shook my head, giving a wry smile. "Mr. Stone, I don't have the money, and I don't have anyone backing me. I know how to care for horses, but starting a ranch, that's completely out of my reach." He smiled, unfazed. "Ethan, money isn't the biggest issue. Will and talent are what matter. I want to help you. I'll invest a sum to get you started. Not a fortune, but enough for you to give it a shot. What do you say?" I stood there, unable to believe my ears. A stranger I'd known for less than an hour was offering to help me achieve the biggest dream of my life. I wanted to say yes immediately, but fear held me back. Fear of failure. Fear of letting Mr. Stone down. Fear that I wasn't good enough to make this opportunity real. I thanked him, asked for his phone number, and promised to think it over. That evening, I returned home, my mind in turmoil. Owen and Ava were playing in the yard while Eleanor was cooking in the kitchen. I sat down with Arthur at the dining table and recounted the story about Mr. Stone. "I don't know if I should take this chance," I said, my voice trembling. "If I fail, I could lose everything. I don't want to disappoint you, Mom, or the kids." Arthur looked at me, his eyes steady and kind. "Ethan, life is a gamble, but if you don't dare to try, you'll never know if you could have won. Sarah always believed in you. She wanted you to live fully for yourself and for the kids. Be strong, son." Eleanor, overhearing the conversation, came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ethan," she said, "I know you're scared, but you've overcome so much already, haven't you? You didn't give up when you lost Sarah, when you were raising the kids alone. You have talent, and now someone wants to help you. Don't let fear stand in your way." Their words were like a powerful gust of wind, clearing the fog in my mind. I sat up all night, thinking of Sarah, of the dreams we used to share. She always said I could do more than I thought possible. "You're the best with horses, Ethan," she'd said, her eyes sparkling. "One day you'll have your own ranch." I looked up at the starry sky, feeling as though she was there, urging me on. And I made my decision. I would take this chance. The next morning, I went to Walter's ranch, my heart heavy but filled with resolve. I knocked on his office door, took a deep breath and said, "Sir, I'd like to resign. I want to try starting my own horse ranch." Walter looked at me, his eyes flickering with surprise, then softening with a touch of regret. "You're the best we've got, Ethan," he said. "I don't want to lose you. But if this is your dream, I support you. If you need anything, come find me. My door is always open." I thanked him, feeling as though a great weight had been lifted. Though my biological family had turned their backs on me, I realized that life still offered people willing to lend a hand. Walter, Mr. Stone, and especially Arthur and Eleanor. A few days after bidding farewell to Walter, I arranged to meet Richard Stone at a small cafe in Lexington. Sitting across from him in my worn shirt and dusty boots, I felt small in the presence of this silver-haired man with sharp, discerning eyes. Mr. Stone didn't beat around the bush. After asking more about my plans, he set his coffee cup down and said plainly, "Ethan, I'm going to invest $1 million in you to start your own horse ranch. In return, I want 30% equity. This isn't a gift. It's a gamble. I believe in you, but you have to prove I didn't choose the wrong person. $1 million. The figure rang in my head like a bell, both exhilarating and terrifying. I had never held such a sum in my hands, never imagined I'd have the chance to turn my dream into reality. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Thank you, Mr. Stone. I won't let you down. With Mr. Stone's investment, I began my entrepreneurial journey. I found a small plot of land on the outskirts of Lexington, not vast, but enough to build a modest stable. I hammered wooden planks, put up fences, and constructed a place to raise horses with my own hands. Every swing of the hammer, every drop of sweat that fell to the ground, was a reminder that this was my one shot. I couldn't fail. I used part of the money to buy a few affordable young horses, ones that larger ranches overlooked. They weren't expensive purebreds, but I believed that with proper care and training, they could become valuable. However, reality quickly taught me that dreams are never easy. The cost of raising horses was higher than I'd imagined: feed, medicine, equipment, and hiring a few seasonal workers to help. Each bill piling up on the table felt like a stab, a reminder that Mr. Stone's $1 million could run out faster than I thought if I wasn't careful. I developed a routine of waking up at 4 a.m. when the sky was still pitch black. I fed the horses, cleaned the stables, checked their health, and trained them myself. The work was so grueling that some days I felt my body might give out. My hands bled from pulling reins, my back ached from hauling bales of hay. Some afternoons, as the golden sunlight bathed the fields, I stood still, watching my young horses, wondering if I was on the right path or chasing a pipe dream. But whenever exhaustion and doubt crept in, images of Owen and Ava flashed in my mind. I remembered their smiles as they ran around Arthur and Eleanor's yard. Eleanor's encouraging look as she set a plate of hot food before me. Arthur's firm pat on the shoulder as he said, "You'll make it, Ethan." Those moments were the only fuel keeping me going. I wasn't doing this just for myself, but for my children, for the Davies family, and for Sarah, who always believed I could achieve something great. But then, a setback hit like a punch to my hopes. One morning, while training a young horse I had high expectations for, a chestnut mare named Starlight with a glossy coat, she suddenly stumbled during a run. Her pained whinny echoed, and I rushed to her, my heart pounding. Starlight lay on the ground, her front leg swollen and unable to stand. I called the veterinarian immediately, but the bad news came like a storm. She had a broken bone, and her chances of a full recovery were slim. I sat down in the middle of the stable, head in my hands, feeling as though my world had collapsed. Starlight wasn't just a horse. She was my hope, proof that I could turn Mr. Stone's investment into reality. I had poured so much time, effort, and money into her. And now it all seemed to vanish. Tears fell, not from weakness, but from the crushing sense that I had failed Mr. Stone, the Davies family, and myself. At that moment, I heard footsteps. Richard Stone appeared, his tall, lean figure casting a shadow on the ground. I quickly wiped my tears, trying to stand, but he raised a hand to stop me. "Sit down, Ethan," he said, his voice calm, but without a hint of reproach. He sat beside me, looking at Starlight as the vet tended to her. "Failure is the price of experience," he said. "If you can't get through this lesson, you'll never stand tall in this business. Horses, like life, don't always go the way you plan. But the good ones aren't those who never fail. They're the ones who get back up." His words were like a ray of light piercing the darkness. I looked at him, feeling both ashamed and immensely grateful. He didn't scold me or pull his investment. He showed me that failure was part of the journey. I nodded, clenching my fists, determined not to let this moment defeat me. In the days that followed, another surprise came. Walter, my old boss, visited the ranch. He brought homemade cookies from his wife and an old notebook filled with years of his ranch management experience. "You're doing well, Ethan," he said, his voice full of encouragement. "But running a ranch isn't just about caring for horses. You need to know how to balance expenses, choose the right people to work with, and keep your spirit strong." He spent the afternoon sharing invaluable tips, from cost-effective feed choices to spotting early signs of illness in horses. His help, though seemingly small, was a powerful boost to my morale. From those failures and encouragements, I gradually forged resilience. I learned to accept loss, to rise after every fall. Starlight couldn't recover for racing, but I cared for her diligently, hoping one day she could be a healthy horse for other purposes. I kept working, kept learning, and began to see a faint light at the end of the road. My small ranch, though still rough around the edges, was slowly becoming a place of promise. Each day I rose before the sun, when the stars still twinkled in the Kentucky sky. I stepped into the stable, breathing in the scent of hay and damp earth, feeling my heart beat in rhythm with the breaths of the horses. I had learned to manage my time more tightly, breaking tasks into smaller pieces to avoid being overwhelmed. I cared for each young horse with the same meticulous attention I gave to Owen and Ava. I spent hours training them, observing every stride, every flick of their tails, searching for ways to unlock their potential. In those moments, watching them gallop across the small field, I felt a quiet pride, as if I were building something greater than myself. After months of struggle, those efforts began to bear fruit. One afternoon, I took Dusty, a silver-gray stallion, to a small local race. It wasn't a grand event like the Lexington Fair, just a competition for small ranches in the area. I didn't expect much, only hoping Dusty would get a chance to test himself and I could learn more. But as the race began, I stood by the fence, heart pounding, watching Dusty surge forward, overtaking competitors with a strength I hadn't anticipated. When he crossed the finish line in third place, the crowd clapped, and I stood there stunned, hardly believing my eyes. It was my first victory, modest though it was, but to me it was like a ray of sunlight piercing through dark clouds. Word of Dusty's performance spread quickly through the tight-knit community of horse breeders in Kentucky. My name, Ethan Miller, began to be mentioned, not as a hired farmhand, but as a promising horse trainer. Opportunities for partnerships and business started to trickle in. One morning, as I was cleaning the stables, a middle-aged man drove up to the ranch. He introduced himself as the owner of a small ranch nearby and asked me to train one of his young horses. "I heard about your Dusty," he said, his eyes full of confidence. "You've got talent. I want to see what you can do with my horse." I could hardly believe my ears. For the first time, someone had sought me out, trusted me, and was willing to pay for my skills. I agreed, though inwardly I worried about meeting expectations. But as the man left, I stood in the stable, gripping the reins tightly, feeling as though a new door had just opened. Soon after, a few others approached me, asking about buying horses or hiring me to train theirs. Revenue began to come in, not much, but enough to cover some expenses and ease the financial pressure. For the first time in months, I felt like I could truly breathe. These changes didn't just happen at the ranch. Owen and Ava, now a bit older, became an integral part of my life here. On weekends, when they didn't have school, they'd scamper out to the ranch, carrying little buckets to help me feed the horses. Owen loved standing beside me, learning to brush Ember, one of the horses, while Ava perched on the fence, scribbling colorful drawings of the horses. One day, Ava handed me a drawing, a golden-coated horse with a man in a straw hat, standing beside two small children. "This is you, Owen and me," she said, beaming. "We're a team, right, Daddy?" I hugged her, tears welling up. "That's right, sweetheart. We're a team." Watching Owen and Ava grow up amid these hardships, I realized that despite material struggles, they had a home. Not just with Arthur and Eleanor, but here among the stables and fields. The ranch wasn't just my dream, it was a place where I wanted my children to learn that life, though tough, is always worth fighting for. Arthur and Eleanor, seeing my progress, couldn't hide their pride. One evening when I returned home, Eleanor pulled me out to the porch where she and Arthur were sipping tea. "Ethan," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Today, I heard the neighbors talking about you. They said, you're making something of that ranch." "I'm so proud." Arthur nodded, adding, "You're not just our son-in-law. You're our son." Their words left me speechless. I bowed my head, trying to hide my overwhelming emotions. "I don't know how to thank you both," I said. "Without you, the kids and I wouldn't have made it to today." Eleanor took my hand, her voice gentle. "Don't say that. We're family." Their words filled me with indescribable happiness. In the days that followed, my life seemed to take on brighter colors. One day, Richard Stone visited the ranch. He walked in, surveying the stables, his sharp eyes tinged with satisfaction. "You're doing well, Ethan," he said, pausing to pat Dusty. "I heard about your win at the race. It's a good start, but remember, this is just the beginning. Reputation is what keeps clients coming back. Keep working hard, and you'll go far." Mr. Stone's encouragement was like a gust of wind fueling my resolve. I knew he hadn't just invested money in me, he'd invested his trust, and I was determined not to let him down. At the end of the day, as the sun set, I stood in the stable, surrounded by the scent of hay and the sound of horses whinnying. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling as though a weight had been lifted. The road ahead was still long, and challenges awaited, but at least I had taken my first solid steps. I looked out at the fields where the sunset painted the sky golden and whispered to Sarah, "Do you see love? I'm doing it for you, for our kids, and for our family." In the days following Dusty's victory, my small ranch began to take new strides. I poured my heart into training Ember, the horse Owen adored. She was a mare with a fiery red coat and deep black eyes that shone like coal. I saw her latent strength from our first training sessions. I spent hours each day working with her, refining her strides, teaching her to navigate small obstacles. Then an opportunity arose when a larger race was held in the neighboring county, drawing ranches from across Kentucky. I entered Ember, not daring to hope for too much, but deep down I believed she could do something special. On race day, I stood by the fence, hands clenched, heart pounding. When the starting gun fired, Ember surged forward, her strides powerful and resolute. The crowd cheered, and I could barely breathe as I watched her overtake one competitor after another. When Ember crossed the finish line in second place, I shouted, unable to contain my emotions. It wasn't just Ember's victory, it was mine. A triumph born from months of exhaustion, sleepless nights, and the unwavering faith I had placed in myself. News of Ember's success spread like wildfire across the dry plains. The local paper began mentioning my name, Ethan Miller, as an inspiring story. A man who started with nothing, lost his wife, raised 2 children alone, and was now the owner of a promising horse ranch. One morning, as I fed the horses, a young reporter from the local newspaper showed up. She carried a camera and a friendly smile, asking about my journey. I was awkward, unaccustomed to attention, but I opened up about Sarah, Owen, and Ava, the tough days, and how the Davies family and Mr. Stone had helped me stand again. When the article was published, people started calling my place Miller Ranch, as if it had become a trusted name in Kentucky's horse breeding community. I felt proud, but also astonished. Just months ago, I was a desperate man, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. Now I had a small ranch, a growing reputation, and a modest income that let me breathe easier. But just as I began to see a glimmer of light, a shadow from my past unexpectedly returned, my biological family. That afternoon, as I was checking the fences around the stable, a sleek car pulled up at the gate. I squinted and immediately recognized my parents' car, George and Susan Miller. They stepped out along with Daniel, my younger brother, whom I hadn't seen since Sarah's funeral. I stood tall, trying to stay calm. But inside, a storm of emotions churned. What were they doing here? After years of coldness, after turning their backs when I needed them most, why were they showing up now? "Ethan?" Susan began, her voice artificially sweet. We heard you're doing so well. We just wanted to visit, see how you and Owen and Ava are doing. I nodded politely, inviting them in. Owen and Ava were playing in the yard, and when they saw their grandparents, they hesitated, not running to hug them as they did with Arthur and Eleanor. I led them into the small house near the ranch where the kids and I stayed when not at my in-laws. George looked around, his eyes scanning the simple wooden walls as if appraising the place's worth. This ranch? It looks decent, he said, his tone attempting warmth, but carrying an undercurrent of condescension. You're my son. No matter what, you should remember your roots. Family is the most important thing, you know. I sat there, my hands gripping the edge of the table, feeling as though my chest was being crushed. Roots. Family. Those words rang in my head like a bitter joke. I remembered the day I stood at their door, begging for help after Sarah's death, when Owen and Ava were too young to understand their loss. Back then, George had looked at me with cold eyes, telling me to handle it like a man. Now, as Miller Ranch gained recognition and the press hailed me as an inspiring story, they showed up talking about family as if they had never turned away. Susan, in her expensive silk dress and meticulously styled hair, chimed in, her voice sweet but laced with reproach. Ethan, really? She said, fidgeting with her glossy leather purse as if to mask her unease. You haven't visited us in so long. We've been worried about you. You've been busy with the ranch, but family is still where you belong, isn't it? I looked at her, struggling to keep my face composed. But inside, anger surged. Worried about me? When had they ever worried? When I was exhausted from working and raising 2 kids alone. When I knocked on their door, pleading for help, only to be met with indifference. I wanted to shout, to unleash the years of pent-up resentment. But I glanced at Owen and Ava, sitting quietly in the corner, their wide eyes watching me with concern. For their sake, I had to stay calm. But Daniel, my brother, seemed intent on pushing further. He sat across from me, hands clasped tightly, his forced smile failing to hide his tension. Ethan, he said, trying to sound friendly. I heard your ranch is doing great. The Louisville race, the article in the Lexington Herald, you're really making waves. I was thinking maybe we could work together. I've got some ideas. With a bit of capital, we could scale things up. Brothers working together, we'd be unstoppable. I looked at Daniel, and for the first time, I saw the falseness in his eyes. Daniel, whom my parents always touted as their pride. But I knew he'd failed in his city business ventures. Now he was here, not to congratulate me, but to take advantage. The pressure from them grew heavier, like an invisible wall boxing me in. George kept talking about family duty. Susan sighed, blaming me for keeping my distance, and Daniel repeated his partnership pitch with increasing urgency. I felt cornered, my heart pounding, my mind reeling with anger and disappointment. At that moment, a small but resolute voice broke through the stifling air. No. Owen, my 7-year-old son, sprang up from his wooden chair, his fists clenched, eyes blazing with determination. You don't care about Dad, he said, his voice trembling but resolute, like a small flame flaring in a storm. When Mom died, Dad came to you for help, but you didn't want him. You only cared about Uncle Daniel. Now that Dad's doing well, you show up. You just want his money. The room fell silent as if time itself had frozen. I stared at Owen, stunned by my son's courage. His messy brown hair and clear eyes stood defiant, small but unyielding, as if carrying Sarah's indomitable spirit. In his gaze, I saw my wife, her honesty, her refusal to bow to injustice, her fearlessness in the face of deceit. My heart ached with both pride and sorrow, realizing a 7-year-old had spoken the words I should have said long ago. George and Susan paled. George opened his mouth but couldn't speak, glaring at Owen with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Susan clutched her purse tightly, her lips pursed as if trying to suppress her shame. But Daniel, his face red with fury, leapt to his feet, pointing at Owen. You disrespectful brat, he shouted, his voice shrill. How dare you talk to your grandparents like that? No manners at all. His words were the final straw. I could no longer stay silent. I stood, stepping in front of Owen, shielding my son. I looked straight into the eyes of George, Susan, and Daniel. My voice was firm and unwavering. Enough. Owen's right. When I needed you most, when I lost Sarah, when I was raising 2 kids alone, you turned your backs. You never treated me like family. I don't need you anymore. I want you to leave. Now. The air in the room was heavy as stone. George stared at me, his eyes flashing with anger and shame, but he said nothing. Susan looked down, her hands trembling as if wanting to speak, but unable to. Daniel muttered a curse under his breath and stormed out, the wooden door slamming behind him. George and Susan slowly stood, avoiding my gaze, avoiding Owen and Ava, and left in silence. The sound of their car engine faded into the distance, leaving a heavy but liberating quiet. I knelt down, hugging Owen tightly, feeling his small heart pounding in his chest. "Thank you, son," I whispered, my voice choked. "You were so brave." Owen nestled into me silent, but I knew he understood. He had just protected our little family. Ava ran over, wrapping her arms around me, and in that moment, I felt a new strength, the strength of love and unity. But deep inside, it pained me to realize that my biological family, whom I once hoped would be my support, only came when they smelled money and fame. They were no longer my family. My true family was Owen, Ava, Arthur, Eleanor, and those who stood by me when I had nothing but pain and empty hands. After the confrontation with my biological family, I threw myself back into work at the ranch, trying to focus all my energy on the horses. Ember continued to bring in victories, not just at local races, but also at larger competitions where prestigious ranches gathered. Another horse, Rusty, began showing potential, taking first place in a race in Louisville. The name Miller Ranch grew more recognized, and I received more contracts, from training horses for other ranches to selling the young horses I had raised. Each deal was a step forward, helping me stabilize finances and expand the stables. But I never expected that these successes would catch the attention of a major player in the horse racing industry, Equine Ventures, a name revered by anyone in the business. One morning, as I was checking Rusty's health, a sleek black car pulled up at the ranch gate. 2 men in suits stepped out, one introducing himself as Michael Vance, CEO of Equine Ventures. They didn't beat around the bush. After touring the ranch, admiring the horses, and hearing about my training methods, Vance looked me in the eye and said, "Ethan, we're impressed with what you've done. Miller Ranch is a rough diamond. We want to buy the entire operation for $100 million. You'd stay on as manager, at least until you're 60. What do you say?" I stood there stunned, feeling the ground shift beneath me. $100 million. The number rang in my head like a bell, so overwhelming it left me dizzy. I had never imagined hearing such an offer, not for a farmer like me. I mumbled a thank you, asked for time to think, and watched them leave, my mind still reeling. That night, I couldn't sleep, wrestling with chaotic thoughts. $100 million could change everything. I could secure a future for Owen and Ava, top schools, a life free from financial worries. I could repay Arthur and Eleanor, buy them a comfortable home, and ensure they enjoyed their later years. But at the same time, I was afraid. Miller Ranch was my life's work, the dream Sarah and I had cherished. If I sold it, would I lose my freedom, my control over the horses I poured sweat, blood, and tears into raising? Would I still be myself, or just a cog in a corporate machine? In the days that followed, I agonized over the decision. I didn't want to make it alone, so I turned to those I trusted most. First, I went to Arthur and Eleanor. I sat with them in their kitchen, recounting the entire story. Eleanor listened, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes gentle, but tinged with concern. "Ethan," she said, "I know the ranch is your heart and soul. But think of Owen and Ava. An opportunity like this doesn't come twice. You could do so much for them, for yourself." Arthur nodded, his voice low but steady. "You've built something incredible, Ethan. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. The important thing is that you hold on to your love for horses for this work." Their advice gave me much to ponder, but I was still uncertain. I drove to meet Walter, my old boss, who always offered a grounded perspective. We sat in the familiar Lexington cafe. As I shared the story, he let out a dry laugh. Ethan, not every farmer gets a $100 million offer. You've done what most can only dream of, but you need to decide what matters more, keeping the ranch in your hands or securing the best future for your family. Finally, I called Richard Stone. The next day he was at the ranch. I walked him through the stables, explaining Equine Ventures' offer. He listened without interrupting, then sat on a wooden bench, gazing out at the fields. Ethan, he said, selling the ranch doesn't mean losing it. You'll still be the manager, the soul of this place. This isn't an end, it's a new phase. But you must ensure you retain control over what matters, how you care for the horses, how you run the ranch. Don't let them turn you into a puppet. Mr. Stone's words were like a light illuminating my path. I realized I could accept the offer, but still protect my passion. After many sleepless nights, I made my decision. I would sell Miller Ranch, but only on the condition that I retained full professional control. I didn't want to be just an employee. I wanted to remain Ethan Miller, the horse trainer who built this dream from the hardest days. I contacted Equine Ventures, laying out my terms. After tense negotiations, they agreed. The contract was signed, and I officially became the manager of Miller Ranch with $100 million in hand and a wide-open future for my family. In the days that followed, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer the penniless farmer, exhausted each night from worrying about my children. I was Ethan Miller, the manager of a renowned horse ranch, a millionaire, but more importantly, a father, a son-in-law, and a man determined to live true to his values. I knew the first thing I had to do was fulfill my promise to Sarah, to care for her family, who had become my true family. I drove to see Arthur and Eleanor, bringing along a carefully prepared set of documents. Sitting at their familiar kitchen table, where the scent of Eleanor's freshly baked bread lingered in the air, I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, Dad, I have a gift for you." I slid the documents toward them, papers for a spacious house on the outskirts of Lexington, complete with a large garden and a peaceful lakeside retreat. "This is a place where you can enjoy your retirement," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I want you to live comfortably, without any worries. I owe you everything." Eleanor looked at me, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Ethan, you don't owe us anything," she said. But I shook my head. "No, Mom. Without you and Dad, the kids and I wouldn't be here today. This is what I promised Sarah and myself." Arthur, a man of few words, placed his hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "Son," he said, his voice warm and steady, "we're proud of you." They agreed to accept the gift, though they reminded me that to them, family was worth more than any house. Watching them embrace each other, smiling with joy, I felt a part of my heart heal. I knew Sarah was smiling somewhere, content that her family was cared for. But I wanted to do more. I wanted Sarah's name to live on, not just in our hearts, but in the community. I used a portion of the money to establish the Sarah Davies Miller Scholarship Fund for rural Kentucky children. Kids like Sarah once was, full of dreams, but lacking opportunity. The fund would help them pursue education, from grade school to college, so they could reach beyond what their circumstances allowed. I wanted Sarah to be an inspiration, a guiding light for those struggling through hardship. Meanwhile, I enrolled Owen and Ava in better schools in Lexington. I wanted them to have a proper education, but I always reminded them of their roots. One evening, sitting with them in the living room, I said, "Kids, everything we have today started with love and perseverance. Never forget your grandparents. Never forget your mom. We don't need to be proud in a boastful way. Just live well. Live kindly." Owen nodded, his eyes bright with understanding, while Ava hugged me, whispering, "I'll make you proud, Daddy." The Scholarship Fund's launch event was held in a small community hall in town. I stood before the crowd, flanked by Arthur, Eleanor, Owen, and Ava. Local reporters were there, cameras flashing, and I felt as nervous as I did before my first horse race. When asked about my journey, I took a deep breath, my voice catching. I was just a farmer with nothing. If I have everything today, it's because of my wife, Sarah, and my in-laws, who never turned their backs on me. They're my real family. Those simple, heartfelt words echoed through the hall. The crowd applauded, and I saw deep pride in Arthur and Eleanor's eyes. My story spread not just in Kentucky, but beyond, becoming an inspiration about gratitude and perseverance. People saw me not just as a millionaire, but as a man who stood up for family values, who repaid kindness the right way. But that moment also brought a bitter contrast. I hadn't expected George, Susan, and Daniel to be there. They were standing in a far corner of the hall. As I spoke my gratitude for Arthur and Eleanor, I saw them freeze. George tried to mask his shame, his lips pressed tight. Susan bowed her head, clutching her expensive purse as if to shield herself from the crowd's gaze. Daniel, his face flushed with anger, left before the event ended. I wasn't surprised, but the pain lingered. They were never my family when I needed them most. And now, as I stood at the peak of success, they came only to face the truth that I no longer needed them. When the event ended, Eleanor gripped my hand tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You've made me proud, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. Arthur hugged me, and in that moment, I felt Sarah was still here, in the embrace of our family. I had solidified my place, not just as a financial success, but as a man of gratitude and integrity. I had repaid the right people at the right time in the right way. And that was my greatest victory. In the days following the scholarship fund announcement, I returned to my familiar routine, but with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Miller Ranch, now under my management and backed by Equine Ventures, continued to thrive. The young horses I trained galloped across the fields, bringing new victories, and the ranch's reputation grew ever stronger. But for me, the most meaningful thing wasn't the numbers in my bank account. It was the pride in Owen and Ava's eyes, the joyful smiles of Arthur and Eleanor, and the knowledge that I had kept my promise to Sarah. One late afternoon, as the golden sunset bathed the Kentucky fields, I decided to take Owen and Ava out. I led Ember, the fiery red mare I cherished, on a walk with the kids. Owen held the reins, mimicking my stride, while Ava skipped alongside, picking wild flowers and tucking them into her hair. We walked along the familiar dirt roads where I once drove my old pickup truck during the hardest days, and stopped at a small cemetery nestled in the fields. Sarah's grave lay beneath an old oak tree. Its simple stone marker engraved with her name, Sarah Davies Miller, beloved wife, mother, and friend to all. I knelt, placing a bouquet of daisies Ava had picked on the grave, and held my children's hands. Owen, now taller, stood solemnly while Ava nestled into me, whispering, "Daddy, does Mommy know we're here?" I smiled, ruffling her hair. "She knows, sweetheart. She's always here in our hearts." I looked at the headstone, feeling as though Sarah was looking back at me, her eyes as gentle and loving as ever. I whispered, my voice soft, "Sarah, rest easy. Our family is strong, and you'll always be a part of everything I have today." Owen and Ava said nothing, just held my hands tightly, and we stood there in silence, enveloped by the sunset's glow. I thought about my journey, from the dark days of losing Sarah, when my biological family turned their backs, to the grueling months lifted by Arthur and Eleanor's support, and finally to the victories I never dared dream of. But above all, I realized a profound truth. Family isn't always about blood. Family is those who stand by you in your weakest moments, who give you the strength to keep going when the world seems to turn away. Arthur and Eleanor, Richard Stone, Walter, they taught me that gratitude and loyalty to those who truly love you are the most worthy ways to live. I thought of George, Susan, and Daniel, who only appeared when I succeeded, and I realized their presence no longer mattered. They chose to stand outside my life when I needed them most. And now I had found my true family, not in blood, but in love and shared sacrifice. As I led Owen and Ava back home, I looked at my children, my heart brimming with resolve. I wanted them to grow up with the lesson I'd learned. Success isn't just measured by money or fame, but by how you cherish family and leave a legacy for the next generation. The Sarah Davies Miller Scholarship Fund would continue to help rural children chase their dreams. And I would keep teaching Owen and Ava to live simply, gratefully, and to always remember their mother. That was how I would keep Sarah alive. Not just in memory, but in the values we passed down. As the sunset faded, I paused once more, gazing out at the fields. The sound of horses whinnying mingled with the wind like a melody of life. I smiled, feeling I had found the true meaning of success, not in numbers, but in love, gratitude, and the family I chose to cherish. This whole journey taught me a painful, but ultimately beautiful, lesson about what truly matters. What does family mean to you, and have you ever had to redefine who your real family is? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. I'm reading every single one.